The dinner rush had reached its peak. Silverware clattered, voices layered over each other, and the scent of garlic butter filled the air. At the corner booth, a man in a tailored suit tapped his watch. His foot bounced under the table, irritation clear on his face. A young waitress rushed toward him, a tray balanced carefully in her hands. "Finally," the man muttered. His fingers drummed against the table. He barely looked up. She placed the steak in front of him, her posture straight, her voice calm. "Here you go, sir. Let me know if you need anything else." The man lifted his fork, then stopped. His expression darkened. This is overcooked. I'm sorry about that," she said, reaching for the plate. His hand shot out, covering the plate's edge. His voice cut through the air, loud enough for nearby tables to pause their conversations. "Do you even know what medium rare is? This looks like a piece of rubber." The room tensed. The waitress swallowed. Enough." His voice sharpened. "You've wasted my time. Where's your manager?" A hush fell over the nearby tables. A few glances flickered toward the waitress. Her fingers curled into a fist at her side. She inhaled, steady and slow. Then she spoke. "No need to call the manager?" She leaned in slightly, her eyes locked on his. "I own this restaurant." The man blinked. His hand froze midair, still gripping the fork. A slow smirk curled at the edge of his lips. "You?" He let out a sharp laugh, glancing around as if expecting someone else to correct her. "You own this place?" The waitress, no, the owner, did not flinch. She stood tall, her hands clasped in front of her, steady. "Yes, I do." The restaurant had fallen silent. Other diners exchanged glances, waiting. The man leaned back, exhaling through his nose. He shook his head, eyes filled with disbelief. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of prank?" "No joke," she said, her voice even. The man studied her now, really looked at her. She was young, early 30s maybe, dressed in the same uniform as her staff, black slacks, white button-up, hair neatly tied back. There was no sign of wealth, no flashy jewelry, no expensive watch. "Then why are you waiting tables?" His lips curled into something close to amusement. "Shouldn't you be in an office somewhere? Or at least dress the part?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for his plate, lifting it smoothly. "I still work shifts when we're short-staffed," she said. "I believe in leading by example." The man scoffed. He adjusted his tie, shaking his head again, the smirk returning. "That's cute, really. But if you were the owner, you'd have better people working here. Because, let's be honest, the service? It's terrible." A low murmur swept through the room. Some customers looked down at their plates, pretending not to listen. Others shifted uncomfortably. The owner placed his plate on a tray and looked him in the eye. "I take my team's performance seriously. If there's an issue, I want to fix it." "Yeah?" He raised an eyebrow. "Then fire yourself, because you messed up my order, didn't you?" Silence. The insult landed sharp and cutting. A few gasps from nearby tables. The owner's jaw tightened, but her expression remained unreadable. "Sir," she said, voice steady, "I will have a new steak made for you immediately." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. You're telling me you're the boss, but you still act like a waitress." He leaned forward, voice dripping with mockery. "You know why? Because that's all you are." A muscle twitched in her jaw. Across the room, an older man in a chef's uniform had stepped out from the kitchen. His arms were crossed, his face tight. A few other servers hovered nearby, their eyes on their boss, waiting. The man smirked, enjoying the attention. "You see," he continued, "real success means power. And power means you don't serve people, you make them serve you. The owner didn't react. She simply set the tray down and turned. "Enjoy your meal, sir." Then she walked away, disappearing through the kitchen doors. The man let out a low chuckle, shaking his head again. "Unbelievable," he muttered, stabbing at his potatoes. What he did not know was that his night was far from over. And soon he would regret every word. The man cut into his steak, chewing slowly. The taste was good, not that he would admit it. He sipped his wine, eyes scanning the room. Conversations had resumed, but there was an air of unease. Good, he liked making people uncomfortable. A waiter passed by carrying a tray of drinks. The man lifted a hand. "Hey!" The young server froze, turning quickly. "Yes, sir. Get your boss out here, the real boss." He smirked, shaking his glass. "Or do I need to remind her who pays her bills?" The waiter hesitated. "Sir, she—" "Go." His voice turned sharp. The server hurried off. The man leaned back in his seat, tapping his fingers against the table. He had met plenty of people like her before. Dreamers, people who thought they could climb their way up without paying the price. A few minutes passed. Then the kitchen doors swung open. She was back. The owner walked toward him, composed. No rush, no fear. She placed a fresh glass of wine on the table. "You asked for me?" He chuckled, swirling the drink in his hand. "Yeah, you see, I don't like being lied to." She raised an eyebrow. "Lied to?" He nodded. "There's no way you own this place." A slow, amused smile crossed her lips. "You're welcome to believe whatever you like." He scoffed. "Oh, I believe what I see. And what I see is a woman in an apron refilling my wine." A quiet tension settled between them. She held his gaze, calm, unshaken. "Is that a problem, sir?" He smirked, leaning in. "It is if you expect me to take you seriously." She folded her arms. "You came here for a meal. You received one. What exactly do you want?" He tilted his head. "Respect." She blinked. "Respect?" "That's right." He gestured around the room. "Do you know how the world works? People like me, people with real power, run things, and people like you." He lifted his glass. "You serve us?" "Who?" She didn't respond. She just stood there, watching him, letting the silence stretch. The man chuckled. "What? No comeback?" She finally spoke. "I don't argue with people who look down on others." He scoffed. "That's cute. Really? But let's get something straight. I'm not just another customer. I could buy a place like this without thinking twice." She nodded, as if considering his words. "And yet here you are." His smirk faltered slightly. "Excuse me?" She tilted her head. "If you have so much power, why are you spending your evening here in my restaurant, arguing with a waitress?" His jaw tightened. The tables nearby had grown quiet again. People were listening, watching. A slow grin spread across her face. "Maybe you do have power, maybe you have money, but do you know what you don't have?" He didn't answer. She leaned in slightly. Control. The grin vanished from his face. For the first time that night, the balance had shifted. The tension increases. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "You think you're clever, don't you?" She didn't react. He tapped his fork against his plate. "You know what I hate about people like you?" She waited. "You pretend to be something you're not. Acting like you're in charge when really, you're just another worker." She held his stare. "What makes you think that?" He leaned forward. "Because real owners don't waste time waiting tables." "Is that so?" She tilted her head slightly. "That's right." He smirked. "I know the business. I know power. And I know one thing for sure. If you were really in charge, you wouldn't be standing here arguing with me." She was silent for a moment. Then, with a small smile, she straightened her posture. Power, you say? His smirk deepened. That's right. She glanced around the restaurant. Do you know why people respect leaders? He scoffed. Because they have money, influence, control. Wrong. His eyebrows lifted slightly. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. People respect leaders when they know those leaders would never ask them to do something they wouldn't do themselves. The air between them felt heavier now. You see, I don't hide behind a desk. I don't bark orders from an office while my staff struggles. I work beside them. I show them I understand their struggles, and because of that, they trust me. The man's smirk wavered for the briefest moment. She continued, her voice steady. A title doesn't make you powerful. Money doesn't make you powerful. Respect does. He scoffed, rolling his eyes. Nice speech, but respect doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart. A flicker of something crossed her face, but she remained calm. I'm not looking for your respect. The man chuckled, shaking his head. Then why are you still standing here? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to the side, motioning toward one of the other waiters. Bring me the books. The waiter nodded and disappeared into the back. The man raised an eyebrow. Books? You said I wasn't the owner, she said. So let's settle this. He laughed. You're serious? She smiled. Very. Moments later, the waiter returned, carrying a thick black binder. He placed it on the table in front of her. She opened it and slid a page forward. Here, she said, tapping the paper. Ownership documents. My name is right there. The man's smile faded. Slowly, he leaned forward, eyes scanning the paper. His fingers twitched. She watched as his expression shifted. Doubt. For the first time that night, doubt flickered across his face. You really own this place? She nodded. Yes. The room was silent. He leaned back, arms crossing over his chest. His usual confidence had dimmed slightly, but he wasn't ready to admit defeat. Fine, he muttered. Maybe you are the owner, but you still work tables like the rest of them. Her smile didn't fade. Yes, I do. And that's why this restaurant is successful, because I'm not above the work, he scoffed, shaking his head. That's not how power works. She let out a soft laugh. Maybe not in your world? The man glanced around, realizing how many eyes were on him. The weight of the moment settled in. She had control now, and he hated it. The man's smirk was gone. He sat still, staring at the ownership documents in front of him. For the first time that night, he had nothing to say. The owner watched him, waiting. The silence stretched. Then slowly she reached down and closed the binder. I told you, she said, her voice calm. I own this place. He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. Fine. Whatever. He pushed his plate away. Still doesn't change anything. She raised an eyebrow. Doesn't it? His eyes flickered toward the other tables, the staff, the customers. They were all watching. Whispers passed through the room. The weight of the moment settled over him. The man shifted in his seat. He wasn't used to this. He was the one who made others feel small, not the other way around. She leaned forward slightly. Let me ask you something, sir. He tensed. What? If I'm just another worker, if I'm not in charge, then why does everyone here respect me? His jaw tightened. She glanced at the staff behind her, the cooks, the servers, the busboys, all standing by, waiting, not out of fear, but out of loyalty. She met his eyes again. And why doesn't anyone respect you? A muscle twitched in his cheek. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to insult him. The truth was enough. His fingers curled into a fist under the table. He could feel the stares pressing down on him, burning into his skin. For the first time in a long time, he was the one being judged. And he hated it. He grabbed his wallet, pulling out a few bills. He slapped them onto the table. "Here." The owner glanced at the money, then back at him. "I don't need your money," she said. His nostrils flared. "Just take it." She crossed her arms. "That's not how this works." He narrowed his eyes. "What does that mean?" She took a step back and motioned to the door. "It means you're done here." The man's lips parted slightly. A cold weight settled in his chest. You're kicking me out?" "Yes," she said simply. He let out a breathless chuckle. "You can't do that." "I can." She nodded toward the exit. "And I am." The staff moved subtly, shifting forward, not threatening, just present. The message was clear. "Leave." The man clenched his jaw. He wasn't used to losing. He wasn't used to being dismissed. For a moment he thought about arguing, raising his voice, making a scene. But then he saw it, the way people were looking at him, not with fear, with pity. The humiliation burned. Slowly he pushed his chair back and stood. His face was tight, his jaw locked. The owner didn't move. She just watched, waiting. He grabbed his coat and turned, his movements stiff. He stalked toward the exit, his shoes clicking against the tile. He reached the door, grabbed the handle, and stopped. For the briefest second he hesitated. His grip tightened. Then, without another word, he stepped outside. The door swung shut behind him. Silence filled the restaurant. Then slowly conversations resumed. The owner exhaled, rolling her shoulders back. One of the servers stepped up beside her. That was intense. She smiled slightly. "He'll be fine." The server glanced toward the door. "You think he learned something?" The owner shrugged. "That's up to him." She turned, picking up the untouched money from the table. She tucked it into her apron. Then, without another word, she picked up a tray and got back to work. The man stepped outside, the cold night air biting at his skin. His fists tightened in his pockets, his shoulders stiff. He could feel the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. He had been humiliated. No one had ever dismissed him like that before. No one had ever looked him in the eye and told him to leave. His car was parked across the street. He could get in, drive off, and forget this ever happened. That was the easy thing to do. But his feet wouldn't move. Through the restaurant's large windows, he saw her, moving from table to table, greeting customers, checking in with her staff. She wasn't just acting like a boss, she was one. The way her employees looked at her, the way customers smiled when she spoke to them. It was respect, real respect, not the kind that came from fear, not the kind he was used to. The man let out a slow breath, his jaw clenching. All his life, he had believed that power was everything, that if people feared you, they would obey you. But tonight, he had lost. Not because she had more money, not because she had more influence, because she had something he didn't. Loyalty. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. Doubt. Had he been wrong? Had he spent his whole life chasing the wrong thing? The thought unsettled him. With a frustrated sigh, he turned and walked toward his car. He yanked open the door, slid into the driver's seat, and gripped the wheel. For a long moment he just sat there, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. Who was he? A man with money, a man with control. But did any of it matter if no one respected him? The restaurant door swung open behind him, and he caught movement in the mirror. It was her. She stepped outside, adjusting the cuffs of her uniform. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She had already won. She turned, heading toward the side alley where the staff entrance was. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't gloating. She was just getting back to work. The man swallowed, his throat dry. Slowly he started the engine. As he pulled away from the curb, he glanced at the restaurant one last time. He didn't know why, but something about this night felt different. Like maybe, just maybe, he would remember it. Maybe it would change him. Or maybe it wouldn't. That was something only time would tell. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. What do you think? Did the man learn his lesson? Or will he stay the same? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more powerful stories like this, turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching.